They called me useless my entire life, until the day they sat across from me, begging for $1 million loan, and realized I owned the bank. Hi, I'm Ethan Carter. For years, my family mocked my so-called small job in banking, never knowing the empire I was quietly building. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Let's talk about how sometimes success speaks loudest when we say nothing at all. It was the kind of evening that pretended to be warm. The fireplace flickered, candles glowed on the dining table, and a half-hearted garland lay across the mantel. But beneath the soft lighting and reheated turkey sat the same chill I'd grown used to at these Sunday dinners. It had been this way for years, ever since I stopped being the kind of son my parents understood. Dad barely waited for me to sit before he started in. "You never seem to get anything right, Ethan." He said it like a joke, but the silence that followed meant it wasn't. His fork scraped against his plate as he sliced through overcooked turkey, drowning the room in a screech that no one acknowledged. I didn't answer. I hadn't in years. My job here was to eat, nod, and disappear without causing a scene. That had become my silent contract. Mom passed me a dish of green bean casserole, the kind with the crunchy onions on top, now soggy. "You used to love this," she said, not quite looking at me. I nodded and scooped some onto my plate, noticing how the silver serving spoon still had a smudge from the dishwasher. Everything at this table was just slightly off, just like always. Ryan leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of red wine like he was holding court. "So, Singapore's looking good. I'll probably take the offer in January. They're dangling a pretty generous equity stake, and honestly, the US market's just too small for where I want to go." "That's incredible," Mom beamed. "You've always had such vision." Across the table, Lauren dabbed her mouth with a cloth napkin, then launched into her turn. And the closing on the Miami property went through last week. 10,000 square feet, ocean-facing, and the buyer paid in crypto, so we skipped escrow delays entirely. "Amazing," Dad said. "Just amazing." His eyes flicked toward me, already sharpening. "You keeping busy at the bank, Ethan? Still managing checking accounts and ATM upgrades?" "It's client side now," I said, setting my wine glass down with care. "We work mostly with small business portfolios." Dad chuckled under his breath. "So, a glorified clerk." I didn't respond, but I met his gaze for the first time that night. There was no heat behind his insult, just the same tired performance we'd both grown used to. I'd given up expecting recognition years ago. I glanced down the table, my eyes catching the family portraits on the wall. There was Ryan, shaking hands with a senator during his internship, Lauren holding the keys to her first property sale, none of me. The frames ended where my version of success began. Quiet, unannounced, unphotographed. Mom stood and brought in another plate from the kitchen. "Ethan, I know you don't like the fancy stuff, just kept it simple for you. Turkey, mashed potatoes, nothing too exotic." I forced a polite smile. "Looks great, Mom." Truth was, I hadn't eaten like this in years. Not because I thought it was beneath me, but because most of my meals happened at midnight over spreadsheets and deal memos. But there was no reason they needed to know that. Ryan raised his glass. "To family, and to the ones who shoot for the stars." He clinked with Lauren. No one extended a glass toward me. I twisted my wine stem slowly, letting the ruby liquid catch the dim light. Somewhere deep in my chest, I felt that old pull, that ache of not quite belonging. But then, under the table, my phone vibrated. I slipped it out of my pocket and glanced at the screen. Carter Industries, Priority Loan Review, URGENT. I almost laughed. Of course, of all nights. As the room filled with stories I'd heard a dozen times of closing costs, performance bonuses, boardroom drama, I leaned back in my chair. My mind was already somewhere else. Let them talk. Let them compare. Tomorrow, the people who had always spoken over me would finally have to listen. The city hummed faintly beneath me as I stepped into the quiet of my penthouse. The door clicked shut with a soft finality. Outside the tall windows, the skyline of uptown Charlotte sparkled under a sheet of winter air, dressed in red and green lights that blinked lazily from rooftops and street lamps. Somewhere down there, people were still out shopping for last-minute gifts, caught in the glow of holiday cheer. Up here, I had other plans. I loosened my tie, shrugged off my jacket, and placed it carefully on the back of the leather chair near the window. The scent of cedar from the Christmas tree Monica had insisted I install weeks ago still lingered, though no one had touched it since the decorators left. The ornaments hung with perfect symmetry, untouched, unbothered, like me. On the counter, a bottle of handmade Kentucky bourbon waited where I'd left it. I poured a finger into a heavy crystal tumbler and took a seat at the long walnut desk that overlooked the city. My laptop was already open, glowing softly. Notifications blinked in the corner of the screen. One read, Loan application, Carter Industries, priority status, URGENT. I clicked it. Debt ratios, unsustainable, cash flow, inconsistent, outstanding accounts, flagged by underwriting. Requested amount, $1 million. They'd sugar-coated it, of course, buried the risk under fancy phrasing and deferred payment plans. But I knew the numbers. I knew the desperation under the polish. Dad's company was bleeding, and the only person who could stop the hemorrhage was the clerk he mocked at the dinner table. The irony didn't make me smile. Not tonight. I sipped the bourbon and turned to the other tab, a folder marked Omega. Inside were layers upon layers of shell corporations, holding entities, silent acquisitions that stretched across 3 states and 12 industries. Each line, each signature, had been deliberate, careful, invisible, until now. The intercom on my desk buzzed gently. "Ethan," Monica's voice came through, steady and warm. "You're still up?" "I am. The lawyers finished compiling the full disclosure matrix. It's ready when you are." "Good. And the meeting?" 9 a.m. sharp. Conference room C. I glanced again at the application on the screen, then back at the untouched bourbon. "They'll be here?" I asked. "Your parents?" "Yes. They confirmed 20 minutes ago. They think they're meeting with a senior officer to expedite the loan. No idea you're involved." "Perfect." There was a pause on the line, then Monica's voice returned, a little softer. "You sure you want to do this?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and walked toward the window. My reflection stared back at me, just me and the world I'd built behind the glass. "Monica," I said finally, "how many banks do we control now?" 17, including First Liberty. And real estate firms? 8. Not counting the one Lauren tried to partner with last summer. Another sip of bourbon. It was smooth, aged with time and silence. "You remember what my father said last year? Clerks don't make moves that matter." "I remember," she said softly. I looked out at the lights again. Somewhere in that city, my family slept comfortably, still believing the story they'd written about me. The underachiever, the safe player, the one who didn't take risks. "I didn't build this to prove them wrong," I said. "I built it to prove myself right." There was another pause. Then Monica said, "By Monday, everyone will know." I nodded, more to myself than to her. "Then, let's make it Monday." A quiet click ended the call. I set the glass down and retrieved the leather-bound portfolio from the drawer beside me. Inside, final copies of the ownership disclosures rested between gold-trimmed dividers, each stamped and notarized. Every document a nail in the coffin of the old story they clung to. I returned to the window and pressed my fingertips against the cool glass. From here, the city looked small, manageable, like something that could fit into a single hand if you knew where to apply pressure. "Let's see how proud they feel tomorrow," I whispered, watching the light trail of my breath fog the glass. Then I turned away, switched off the lamp, and let the city keep blinking beneath me. At 8:59 a.m., I stood alone in the elevator as it ascended to the top floor of First Liberty Bank. My reflection stared back at me in the brushed metal doors, calm, composed, and unreadable. I adjusted the cuffs of my charcoal gray suit and straightened my tie. The soft chime of arrival echoed in the space just as the doors slid open. Beyond them was a different world. Glass walls framing the skyline, sun glinting off the chrome edges of the boardroom, the long oak conference table gleaming under recessed lighting. It was cold and crisp, like the tone I intended to keep. Monica stood just inside, tablet in hand, already in motion. "They're in place," she said quietly. 10 minutes early." "They always are," I replied. I stepped into the hallway as 2 bank employees, neither of whom knew who I really was, nodded politely and hurried past. The carpeting muffled my footsteps as I made my way toward the double doors of the conference room. Inside, my parents sat at one end of the table. Dad's posture was firm, arms crossed, the edge of a legal pad beneath his fingers. Mom looked around nervously, eyes flicking to each executive as if hoping someone would introduce themselves and settle the confusion. Ryan and Lauren sat beside them. Ryan, as always, was posturing, shoulders back, tie perfectly knotted. Lauren scrolled on her phone, disengaged, as if none of this could possibly concern her. Across from them sat the board of directors, each member seated with quiet attention, folders closed neatly in front of them, expressions unreadable. And then I walked in. The board members stood immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," they said nearly in unison. My father's head jerked toward the voice. He blinked at me, confused, then glanced at the man beside him, as if to confirm what he'd just heard. Monica shut the doors behind me, and silence settled over the room. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the chair, and sat, slowly, deliberately. Dad leaned forward slightly. What is this?" "Good morning," I said, folding my hands calmly on the table. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice." Lauren's phone slipped slightly from her fingers. Ryan sat up straighter. Mom said nothing. "I thought we were meeting with someone in underwriting," Dad said, voice low but pressing. "You are," I said, then nodded to Monica. She tapped her tablet. The screens lining the walls flickered to life, revealing a complex network diagram, webs of companies, bank entities, holding firms, and trusts. In the center, one name was repeated in bold text across each line: Ethan Carter. It was the first time I'd heard nothing from my father in response. No scoff, no immediate dismissal. What is this?" Mom whispered. "This," I said, gesturing to the web behind me, "is your son's actual job, or at least the part you're about to learn." Ryan shifted in his chair, glancing around. "Is this a joke?" "I control majority interest in 17 financial institutions, including this one," I continued. "Over the past decade, I've quietly acquired holding stakes in regional banks, real estate portfolios, and legal firms, all without outside attention." Lauren stared at the screen, then at me. "You're telling us you're not a bank teller?" I smiled faintly. "No, Lauren, I'm the one who signs off on your credit extensions." Monica moved forward, placing 4 folders in front of each family member. "These are your personal financial disclosures," I said. "Updated as of this morning. Ryan, yours includes the $300,000 in silent withdrawals from client trust accounts over the past year." He flinched, his confident mask cracking. "Lauren," I said, "the Miami real estate transaction you've been bragging about never closed. The deal fell apart because the buyer defaulted, and our risk analysts flagged the project as over-leveraged. I pulled the bank's funding 3 days ago." Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. I turned to my parents. "As for Carter Industries, your company is technically insolvent. Your loan request wasn't just a stretch, it was a lifeline, and now it's in my hands." Dad's face turned a shade redder. "You've been hiding this? All these years?" "I didn't hide it. You just never looked beyond your expectations." He stood abruptly, the chair screeching behind him. "We supported you, paid for Stanford, made sure you had every opportunity." "And every judgment," I replied evenly. Every time I wanted to try something different, you called it naive. Every success I achieved in silence was just another reason to dismiss me. Mom's voice wavered. You could have told us. We would have helped. I looked at her gently, but without apology. You would have tried to shape it, mold it into your version of success. I needed to do this my way. The board members watched quietly, not out of rudeness, but respect. They knew what this moment meant. I tapped the folder in front of my father. That is your future. Options, plans, contingencies. You called me useless, yet today you ask me for a future you no longer control. He didn't open the folder. Not yet. Ryan slumped in his chair, a quiet Jesus under his breath. Lauren stared down at the glossy table surface like she hoped it would swallow her whole. No one moved. After a pause, I leaned back slightly and slid another document across the table. These are your options, I said, my tone flat but clear. Choose wisely. And then I waited. The boardroom had emptied out quickly, as it always did when emotions threatened the sterility of business. The directors, polite but distant, had retreated behind closed doors and layers of titles. Only Monica remained, standing quietly by the espresso machine outside, her presence steady as a heartbeat. Inside, we stayed where we were, my parents, Ryan, Lauren, and me, still at the same long table, but the dynamics had shifted, dramatically, visibly. The silence had weight now, no longer contemptuous or dismissive, but wary, tense. I sat at the head of the table where my father used to sit during family dinners, business meetings, even impromptu lectures about discipline and legacy, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Let's talk about terms, I said calmly, folding my hands. Saving the company is possible, but saving your pride? That's a different matter. Dad's jaw twitched. He looked older in the fluorescent light than he had 20 minutes ago. A little smaller, too. The chair didn't seem to hold him the same way it used to. You have our attention, he said, the edge in his voice frayed but intact. Monica returned silently and placed a new folder in front of each of them. This, I said, is the proposed restructuring plan. Our analysts have reviewed your operations, payroll, vendor relationships, and long-term debt. If the company is to survive past Q2, a full overhaul is necessary. Lauren opened her folder first, flipping through it without reading. You want us to give up control? No, I said. I need you to. Ryan leaned forward, tapping the glossy pages. I've managed corporate partnerships. You think I don't know how to fix a bottom line? I reached for a document Monica had placed at my right. You authorized the withdrawal of client trust funds to cover personal debt in August. That move put the firm at legal risk. That was temporary, he began. It was theft, Ryan. The only reason it hasn't reached the Bar Association is because I cleaned it up before anyone noticed. The room shrank around him. His shoulders dropped. He stared at the folder, but not as someone reading, more like someone waiting for it to accuse him further. Lauren scoffed. So what, you're the financial messiah now? Miami was solid until your bank pulled funding. I turned to her, voice level. Our compliance team found falsified contractor documents and pending liens tied to the development. Pulling the loan was standard risk mitigation. Any competent lender would have done the same. Her hands clenched the pages tighter, but she said nothing more. I turned my attention to Mom. She hadn't touched the folder. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, thumb rubbing against thumb. We didn't know, she said quietly. We thought you were just working, modest living, modest job. You never said, because I needed to build something that couldn't be rewritten by anyone else's version of what success should look like, I replied, not unkindly. She blinked, nodding slowly, but didn't speak again. Dad cleared his throat. I may have made mistakes, he said, voice brittle. But this company was built with sweat and sacrifice. You can't just step in with your spreadsheets and dictate the future. I leaned back in the chair. This isn't about dictating, it's about deciding. Do you want Carter Industries to survive? Or do you want to watch it collapse because you couldn't stomach letting go? He said nothing. I glanced at the clock. 10:38. You've got two options, I said, finally opening the folder in front of me. Option 1. We proceed with the plan. You step aside, retain minority equity, and allow my team to stabilize operations. And the other? Dad asked. You find another lender, I said, folding the file shut, which will be difficult considering I now control most of the regional lending institutions you'd turn to. A slow breath escaped his lips. Real men, he muttered. Don't negotiate with emotion. I met his gaze. Then be a real man and sign the plan. Ryan shifted again, glancing toward Mom, then back at Dad. Lauren stared down at her lap. Monica stepped forward. We've reserved a private room down the hall if you'd like time to discuss. No one moved at first. Finally, Dad stood, the chair groaning beneath him. He looked around the room, not at us, but the windows, the polished wood, the ceiling. He'd once walked into places like this as if he owned them. Now he was a guest. As he reached for the folder, his voice broke the silence again. So, you're really doing this? I stood with him. I already did. January arrived with a cold that didn't bite, but settled, low and gray across the skyline, like a thought that wouldn't leave. I watched it through the window of my office, the same one I'd once only passed by on my way to more humble floors. Now, my name was etched in brass outside the door. No more disguises. No more silence. Control hadn't been taken from my family. They gave it away the moment they stopped listening. And today, that truth played out quietly in the background, in the clicks of new shoes on old floors, in the sounds of desks being reassigned. Thomas Carter, once the patriarch of Carter Industries, stood outside what used to be his office. He didn't open the door. He didn't speak to the new COO, James Lynn, a 28-year-old with a sharp mind and zero tolerance for legacy thinking. Dad just looked through the glass panel, nodded to himself, and walked away. I saw it from the monitors. I didn't call out to him. Instead, I turned back to my desk, where 3 acquisition contracts waited for signatures: logistics, fintech, and a distressed property lender. I signed each one deliberately, then pressed my thumb against the biometric pad. Dad once told me I'd never lead anything meaningful. That morning, I became the majority stakeholder in a holding group managing over $3 billion in assets, and still, it felt quiet. The door buzzed. Ryan's downstairs, Monica said over the intercom. Do you want to see him before he leaves? I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, send him up. A few minutes later, Ryan entered, dragging a navy roller suitcase behind him. He was still well-dressed, still tan from who knows where, but the energy was different. Humble wasn't the right word, more like recalibrated. So, Singapore, I said, standing. He shrugged, offering a thin smile. New year, new coastline. And financial therapy? They've got a program through the firm, weekly check-ins. I signed up. He paused, then added, It's not like I had a choice. I nodded. No, you didn't, but you're still lucky. He looked around the office, then back at me. Never imagined you'd be up here. I never imagined you'd need bailing out. Touché? He let out a small laugh. Look, about what I said over the years, let's not, I interrupted gently. Just do better. That's enough. He extended his hand. I took it. After he left, Lauren arrived without an appointment. She walked in with her shoulders back, lips set in a line that used to mean defiance, but now read more like restraint. I reviewed your proposal, I said before she could speak. The mixed-use development in Raleigh. On paper, it's smart. Reasonable budget, diversified tenants, no borrowed reputation. I want to earn it this time, she said simply. You'll be on probation. If the numbers slip, it's done. I understand. There was no sarcasm in her tone, no angle. She took the folder I handed her and left without another word. Progress comes in strange shapes. It wasn't until late afternoon that my mother appeared. She didn't call ahead. Monica let her in without asking. She sat across from me, a small handbag clutched in her lap. Her coat still had specks of cold on the shoulders. "I walked past the boardroom on the way up," she said. "The nameplate's been changed." I nodded. It was time. She looked around the office, taking in the books, the artwork, the family photo I'd placed on the shelf more out of formality than sentiment. "You never told us," she said. "I couldn't," I replied. "I needed to build something you couldn't break." Her eyes softened, but she didn't argue. "We didn't mean to," she started, but let it fade. "I know," I said, "but meaning, well, doesn't undo impact." She nodded slowly, then stood. "I won't stay. Just wanted to see it with my own eyes." As she left, she turned at the door. "You always did like things just so. Even your picture frames are level." That night, after the city lights blinked on, I arrived home later than usual. The elevator opened to the soft hush of my penthouse, still dim, still quiet. And sitting just outside my door was a casserole dish, covered in foil. No note on top, but when I picked it up, a folded slip of paper rested underneath. "You still like rosemary, right?" I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the dish warm in my hands, the scent just starting to seep through the foil. In the hush of the evening, something small and unseen shifted. Not everything had to be earned through power. Some things returned through grace. It started with silence. Not the cold, strained kind that had once filled our family dinners, but a quieter, softer pause. The kind that leaves room for something new to grow. The rooftop garden of my penthouse swayed gently under the warm June evening. String lights arched above us, casting a honeyed glow across the long picnic table I'd set up. The scent of grilled burgers, roasted corn, and fresh basil from the planter boxes drifted through the air. In the corner, a small speaker played an oldies playlist at a low, comfortable volume. This was the first family gathering I had initiated. Dad sat near the end of the table, sipping lemonade, his button-down shirt sleeves rolled up, looking relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Mom chatted softly with Lauren, both of them laughing about a sunburned tomato plant on the balcony. My phone, propped up against a mason jar, showed Ryan's face via video call from Singapore. He was tanner than ever, a faint glow in his smile that hadn't been there before. "I told you," Ryan said, grinning into the camera. "New year, new coastline, and, well, new fiancé." A round of laughter burst from the table. Even Dad chuckled, shaking his head. "You're full of surprises," I said, raising my glass toward the screen. "I learned from the best," Ryan shot back, winking. Lauren leaned across the table, balancing a paper plate heavy with food. "Speaking of surprises, I just got final approval on the Raleigh project. All funding in place, permits cleared. No family favors needed." The pride in her voice wasn't boastful. It was real, earned. "That's incredible," I said, meaning it. She hesitated, then smiled shyly. "Would you take a look at the designs sometime? I'd love your feedback." It was a small thing, but in a family where advice was once synonymous with judgment, it felt enormous. "Of course," I said, nodding. The evening slipped by easily. Burgers were eaten, lemonade poured, old family jokes retold without bitterness. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The old dynamics, the ones built on competition and quiet resentment, had faded, replaced by something lighter. As the last of the plates were cleared and the sky deepened to a velvety navy, Dad tapped his glass lightly with his fork. The sound was small, but enough to gather our attention. "I'm not much for speeches," he said, voice a little rough, "but thank you for pulling us back from the edge, for believing in something bigger than pride." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. We all understood. One by one, they began to leave. Ryan waved from the phone, promising a visit soon. Lauren hugged me quickly, awkwardly, but warmly. Mom kissed my cheek, whispering, "Proud of you, sweetheart," before disappearing into the elevator. Dad lingered a moment longer. He didn't say anything more. He just gave a small nod, a gesture we had never shared before, and followed after the others. The rooftop settled into quiet once more. I walked back to the table, gathering empty glasses, wiping down plates. That's when I saw it. Tucked beneath my water glass was a folded note, the handwriting unmistakable. "You never were useless. We just didn't see clearly. Dad." I stood there a moment, the city stretching wide and glowing all around me. The noise from the streets below floated up, but it felt distant, almost muted compared to the fullness in my chest. My phone buzzed, a text from Monica. "New opportunity, clean energy bank in San Diego. Interested?" I read the message once, then again. I tapped back a reply. "I'll think about it. But for now, I'm home." Above me, the string lights swayed in the soft summer breeze. Below, the city carried on. And around me, the space between who I had been and who I had become finally felt whole. Even as the last of the rooftop lights swayed gently in the summer breeze, I knew something deeper had shifted between us, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. Sometimes, the hardest walls to break aren't built from pride, but from love misunderstood. Life teaches us that success means little if it leaves family behind. True strength lies not in proving others wrong, but in choosing grace when we have every reason not to. Healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. Often it begins with a simple shared meal and a willingness to see each other clearly. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to share your own reflections or memories about family, forgiveness, and second chances. I would be honored to hear your journey.